My name is Kate, and I am on week 29 of long COVID, and I would have been on week 34 of my pregnancy if I hadn't had a miscarriage during COVID. This video just feels impossible to make. I've wanted to share this story though, because when I was feeling like the loneliest person in the world, going through both COVID and a miscarriage back in January, just hearing from someone else who had been there would have been really helpful. So if that is your story, I'm so sorry that you're here. And I'm also grateful to be able to share the story of our child, who we never really got to meet, but who lives on in our memories. So my husband Zac and I have been trying to conceive for a long time, and prior to getting pregnant, we'd been in fertility treatment for about a year. Through the testing and fertility treatment, we learned that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which meant that I wasn't ovulating, and endometriosis, which was blocking one of my fallopian tubes. We knew if we could get me to ovulate, though, that there was a decent chance that I would be able to carry. So we went through several cycles of letrozole with no luck. And the last one was, just before the holidays, just before Christmas. And I got to when my period would have been, took a negative pregnancy test, and that was that. But then on January 1st, I, in the middle of the day, came down with a terrible headache, and then woke up from my nap with a fever, sore throat. I tested positive for COVID on January 3rd, and that is also when I tested positive for pregnancy. As I was lying in bed with terrible COVID symptoms, I got a little alert on my phone from the app that I use to track my cycle. And it's like, hey, if you haven't gotten your period yet, you should take another pregnancy test. But I did, and I took it, and it was positive. And this was not the positive that I had dreamed of. At that point, my husband was negative for COVID. I was in quarantine, so I put the pregnancy test like halfway down the stairs so that he could see it. And we were so excited for this long-awaited little one, and also just really anxious because here I was with this long-awaited pregnancy and also with COVID. At that point, we were really concerned. My doctors were really concerned about keeping my fever low enough, because if your fever gets too high, it sends your body into crisis. So the next 2 weeks were really a blur. I went through all usual COVID symptoms, and then after my fever had started to go down, suddenly it spiked again, and they sent me to urgent care and discovered through a chest x-ray that I had developed Covid pneumonia. And in the urgent care, my doctor named that when you first experience pregnancy, that your immune system kind of tamps down a little bit because you don't want your body to reject this embryo. But that also means that just as my body was sort of tamping down its immune response to try to accept this embryo, COVID had broken in the back door and just went rampant in my body. So I developed COVID pneumonia. But at that point, I felt really pregnant. I had, I couldn't taste or smell anything, but just like sort of like breast tenderness and sort of like, uterine aches for sort of growth and implantation, until about, about a week after my COVID pneumonia diagnosis, I woke up from a nap and I was bleeding. And things started pretty slow, but over the next few days continued to become more serious until my bleeding was basically a period. And at that point, it was pretty clear that I was miscarrying. There were deep breaths. There was a little bit of time when we were sort of in the middle of, you know, is our little one, who we called Sweet Pea, okay? Are they not? And with blood tests, realized that my HCG levels were dropping pretty consistently. And even though there was some remaining fetal tissue in my uterus, it became clear that the pregnancy was not viable. So I was going to need a D&C to clear the remaining tissue. Thankfully, though it's so weird to say thankfully about any of this, I was able to pass the remaining tissue at home, which I'm really grateful for, because at that point, the tachycardia that I've been dealing with ever since had really started to ramp up. And we were looking at, you know, a pretty possibly dangerous situation of, can I even have a surgical procedure with my heart rate this high? So then we moved into just, God, what now? What now? I feel like it took me a long time to grieve because I was so sick. I had a fever for about a month. I have been dealing with long COVID ever since. And it is so hard to grieve the kind of loss where to the rest of the world, you know, this person never existed. But to me, they were our baby. And there will always be the what ifs and the grief of what could have been. So what now? What now? With long COVID, I got diagnosed with a condition called dysautonomia, which is the dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that does all the automatic things like having your heartbeat and breathing and digestion. And for me, it has meant that my heart on its own can't beat at a normal rhythm. It just heart rate through the roof, crazy tachycardia. So I'm on beta blockers in addition to a few other medications to try to control my heart rate. And my cardiologist has made it very clear that it is not safe for me to get pregnant right now or potentially ever. That unless we can control my heart rate, there is always the risk that, you know, your heart rate tends to go up in pregnancy because you are supporting another living being inside your own body system. So unless we can really get my heart rate under control, there is always the risk. There is always the risk in pregnancy that my heart will get to the point of strain where it cannot sustain me and the baby, and we'll have to make a really impossible decision. Part of why I wanted to make this video is I feel like with Roe v. Wade being overturned in the Supreme Court. Abortion is an issue that we as a culture just have such a tough time talking about. And if you have your position on it, most people hold on to it with a death grip and they're not going to move. But I needed to share this because for us who so desperately want a child, we might not be able to try because we won't be able to make medically necessary decisions with my medical team in case of emergency. And you might say, well, in case of the endangering the life of the mother, well, that's different. But at what point is my life in danger, and who decides? I think that's a decision that my medical team and I should make, and not the federal government. I live in New Hampshire, where abortion rights are currently protected, though there is some conversation about reducing the number of weeks where it is permissible, which will certainly affect the outcomes for me. And either way, my ability to have a baby shouldn't be dependent upon what state I live in. So I hope you'll forgive the politics, but the political is personal, and it has always been. And I would really like the chance to become a mom the way I've always dreamed. And I don't know right now if that's possible, but I would like the opportunity to try. And I hope that my government will make that possible. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what has helped through this impossible chapter. There's nothing that makes this go away. And you know that if you're in the middle of it. There's nothing that makes this go away. But there are some things that have helped me, and maybe they'll help you. The first is that, for the most part, the people in your life really want to help. They just don't know how. And of course, there is nothing that anyone can say that will make this better. But I did find it really helpful to be clear with people about what I needed, because people want to help, and sometimes they put their foot in their mouth and they say the wrong thing because they just so desperately want to fix it for you, and sometimes they just need a little bit of coaching in how to support you in the ways that you need. So for me, I was really clear with the people in my life that I did not want to hear any statement that started with "at least." Well, at least you know you can get pregnant, or at least you can try again. That those statements were really going to be incredibly painful, and that all I wanted to hear was, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm praying for you. We are sending so much love your way. Just thinking about you and Zac right now, this has got to be so hard." That they couldn't fix it for me, but they could be in solidarity with me. I also want to name a piece which I'm still really struggling with, which is anger. I feel such anger when people deny that COVID is real and dangerous, especially to the vulnerable. For me as a pregnant person, and for our baby, we were so vulnerable, and sort of blasé, like, well, COVID just impacts like the immunocompromised and the old people and the vulnerable. Like, my baby didn't die so that you could go to Applebee's. And just sort of that sense of anger that the world has, in many ways, it feels like sometimes just moved on. And I am still here dealing with this grief. So if you are experiencing anger or sorrow all of the big ones. Just know that all of those emotions are a normal part of grief, and it's okay to be there. It's okay to be wherever you are. And the last piece that I'll share is the importance of ritual. Ritual just has this way, I say this as an Episcopal priest, as a former hospital chaplain, and as someone who has experienced a miscarriage. There is something about ritual that can hold things that otherwise we just wouldn't be able to. That's why we have funeral services, because we've been passed down these ancient traditions, these ways of holding our grief, even when it feels like it's just going to consume us. So for Sweet Pea, the day I got my positive pregnancy test and positive COVID test, I ordered these little booties. And after we lost Sweet Pea, our bishop, both my husband and I are Episcopal priests, so the bishop is kind of our pastor. So our bishop came over and led us in a service. Our tradition has a service specifically for miscarriage, and it was just so incredibly helpful, because so much of this is just beyond words, and to have words from our tradition and from someone who has cared for us to help carry us through this was so powerful. And there are services like this in all sorts of religious traditions or with no religious tradition. There's books and resources online that can just be incredibly helpful, because especially when it's a miscarriage and you don't have a burial service in a traditional sense, perhaps, though you can certainly. It was really important for both of us to have a way of marking this loss, so that we could grieve it and so that we didn't just ignore it or try to move forward, but that we could really honor this tiny human that we got to be parents of, even for a few short weeks, and know that they will always be part of our family. So Sweet Pea's booties live in this box that I got from Etsy, and it's got a Celtic tree of life on it, and it lives in our living room, and just having the ritual as a way to mark this loss, to hold this loss, to help us hold it so that we could move forward with it as part of our stories, in a way that felt life-giving and healthy, has meant a lot. So thank you for this chance. Thank you for this chance to share Sweet Pea with you. Thank you for this chance to come alongside you in whatever sort of loss you are experiencing. And thank you for this chance to remind you that even when it feels like you are completely alone, that no one has experienced anything like this before, maybe you are in isolation and quarantine dealing with a miscarriage, you are not alone in this. You are held and loved and seen, and so is your little one. So, from me and Sweet Pea to you, take good care, everyone.